The next, is the next call a split call? Is the Green Party?
Mr. Speaker.
No, all right, I call Penny Hinari.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I rise to make a short contribution to the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Amendment Bill. As a father and as a family man, you roll into the supermarket, Mr. Speaker, and you're always mindful of what your children will see. And I think some of the members this evening have raised very good points about a broader look at the amendments that could be made to make this bill a better bill, to make sure that the original intention of this particular bill, of this particular piece of legislation, will meet the requirements as expected in our community. And what those are about, Mr. Speaker, are really about minimising the harmful effects of alcohol in our communities. Some of the members, and the member Alfred Ngaro has mentioned it this evening in his contribution, Mr. Speaker, but I am mindful of just the proliferation of the number of alcohol outlets, in particular in South Auckland, particular in my electorate of Tāmaki Makaurau, the good electorate of Manukau East, my colleague here, Jenny Salesa, who many of the communities have spoken out against the proliferation of these alcohol outlet stores. So I think about those communities when we consider that large supermarket chains, large shopping centres, supermarkets where you can go and purchase alcohol, tend to get these kind of amendments through successful lobbying. And while I appreciate that when you go into a supermarket, you don't want to be inundated with advertisements about alcohol, and you want your children to enjoy the experience of shopping without having to see these things, it is important that we do have specific areas for the sale of alcohol in supermarkets, but I do want the House to reflect on what this means in the communities, in particular in Tāmaki Makaurau and in South Auckland. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party, we do support this bill, and I want to pick up on, in my contribution, on some of the points made by my colleagues of this side of the House. And one of them, and I think the main one, is about this particular bill should be considered the health benefits, the health consequences of this bill should be considered. And we on this side take that very seriously because, as my colleague mentioned, Carmel Sepuloni, on the previous bill in front of the House, that our officers deal with the consequences of alcohol addiction, of drug addiction, and the problems that ensue in communities. They come into our office where we have to deal with our good constituents, and we try our best. Mr. Speaker, it is relatively minor and relatively technical, this particular amendment, but it does highlight a greater need, and some of the contributions this evening have mentioned that greater need. And what that is about the advertising of liquor in general. And we know that the Labour view when this first piece of legislation went through was that we needed to seriously consider the harmful effects of sponsorship of sports teams, alcohol sponsorship of sports teams, because for some reason it's a Kiwi thing. You go to a game of rugby and you have a beer and a hot dog and chips. And while most of us have enjoyed those times, I think if we're really serious about this as an issue moving forward into the future, it's important that we make sure that these pieces of legislation are substantial, that they deal with the issues fair and final in one hit. It doesn't mean that we keep coming back to tinker with these types of important pieces of legislation, because far too often in this House and in my short time as a member, Mr. Speaker, that's what we seem to be doing in the House, coming back here and tinkering with substantial pieces of legislation, when, because of the expediency agenda by this government, of course, pieces of legislation are missing these things. They're missing what they might see as small oversights, but really, in the bigger scheme of things, if it had been done properly, if it had been done right at the beginning, then we wouldn't have to be here wasting the time of the House. Instead, we could be considering...
I'm sorry to interrupt the honourable member. The time has come for me to leave the chair. Members, this debate is interrupted. Order. This debate is interrupted and set down for resumption next sitting day, and the House is suspended, and I will resume the chair at 9 a.m. tomorrow for the extended sitting.